Hi, thanks for coming to what is, in some ways, the most important event for the Society for Economic Botany at this meeting. And that's the awarding of the Distinguished Economic Botanist Award. The award is bestowed annually by the Society upon an individual on the basis of outstanding accomplishments pertinent to the goals of the Society. And this is from the description of the award. The nominee does not need to be a member of the Society. And the chairperson of the Nominations and Awards Committee shall be responsible for the citation, which shall be published in Economic Botany. And the only responsibility of the awardee, although the awardees always have many more responsibilities, but the only thing we ask them to do is to present an address at the annual meeting the year of his or her selection. He or she shall become an honorary member of the Society for Life. Well, today I'm deeply honored to stand here and present to you the recipient of the 2015 Distinguished Economic Botanist Award, Professor Daniel Moerman, Professor Emeritus of the University of Michigan, Dearborn, treasured colleague and dear friend. I'd like to draw your attention to the program that provides a list of some of Dan's publications in the field. So rather than waste our time going through the numerous publications and really amazing publications that are in there, have a look and go out and give them a read. In addition to Dan's major accomplishments in the field of ethnobotany and economic botany, he's also had a parallel and sometimes overlapping career in medical anthropology and beyond as well, as amply demonstrated by the publication titles present there. And in fact, in looking over it, there's a few that I have to admit that I haven't kept up in the last year or two on Dan's publications. So even though he's retired, there's still a lot coming out. And some really significant contributions continuing, and I'm sure there's many more publications to come. So I hope we're not premature in awarding this, but I think it's well timed to give out this award to Dan. I note that the title of Dan's talk tonight is The Accidental Ethnobotanist. Well, there's nothing accidental about Dan's commitment to science. Throughout his career, one finds a rich intellectual curiosity, careful commitment to data and problem solving, and a passion for broad, interdisciplinary questions. Dan has served the Society in many important ways. Perhaps most notably, he was editor-in-chief of Economic Botany at a time of intellectual transition in the Society. He was able to transform the journal in a way that propelled the field, and all of us along with it, into a new realm of interdisciplinary science. Dan has been a major force in our Society, not only through his research achievements, but also as a generous mentor to many of us. I first met Dan while I was a graduate student at my very first meeting of Economic Botany, and his interest and support of my research led to my first collaborative effort with a senior scholar. Our publication together remains one of my most cherished. There are many more things I could say in support of Dan and his suitability for this award, but I think we all agree that we'd much rather hear from the man himself. Please join me in a thunderous round of applause for our 2015 Distinguished Economic Botanist Award, Professor Dan Moerman.
Well, it's with the greatest possible pleasure that I accept this wonderful award. I will treasure it always. Imagine sharing such a thing with people like Will McClatchy, Nancy Turner, Nina Etkin, Mike Balick, Bob Nidelmeyer Pye, the Berlins, the Lewises, Jim Duke, and to do so because of an accident. Well, it was an accident that turned into a passion. Only forget that. Let me see. How do I make this go? There we go. Whoops. Oh, it's just a little slow, huh? There we go. My earliest efforts with plants were not auspicious, especially for the plants. At university, I started out in engineering, but it was way too theoretical for my taste. Is that better?
Yeah, much better.
At university, I started out in engineering. It was way too theoretical for my taste. It was 1959. I was going to build computers. I built my first when I was about 14. It had a bunch of nice switches and was supposed to add binary numbers. So then I was a math major for a while, and a physics major for a while. And then stumbled into anthropology, which sort of worked. The closest, is there a mouse? Oh, here we go. This is I've got some notes here that I'm looking at, and I can't get them to move. I don't know, it doesn't happen very often. I stumbled into anthropology, which worked. The closest I ever had to anything like botany was an inorganic chemistry class. In graduate school, I was a TA, and I taught my first college course in 1974, a summer term version of Introduction to Biotechnology. I really loved teaching. I moved on to a PhD program at the University of Michigan in cultural anthropology. And I conceived or cooked up a dissertation project in the Sea Island region of South Carolina, on the southeast coast of the United States. This is the Sea Island region. Up here is Savannah, Georgia. Down here is Charleston, South Carolina, where we had a meeting just a couple of years ago. And right here is St. Helena Island. Actually, it's right here. And it's just up the coast from a more well-known island, which is Hilton Head Island. If any of you are tennis fans or golf fans, you know about it, because they have it's a hugely developed place with tennis resorts and whatnot. The difference between Hilton Head Island and St. Helena Island is sort of like the difference between Alpha and Omega. Here I have a little closer look at St. Helena. It's the Broad River over here. And this bit here is the island. And this is something called the Broad River. It's a gigantic marsh filled with channels and interluvial and leaf. I love that place. This is called Hunting Island. That strand there, well, that's a white sand beach. It's about, I don't know, 100 yards wide. And this island, I don't remember the name of it, to tell you the truth. When I was there many years ago, it was totally uninhabited. But now, I don't know, you can't really see it there very well, but this whole line, this whole beach is complete. This one is a state park, but this one has now been developed into a million little houses along there. It's kind of strange. This piece here in the middle is called Harbor River. It's a very important part of the history of this island. That's Harbor River. A huge mass of Spartina alternifolia, cordgrass or salt marsh swordgrass. Unbelievable fishing. And an egret, that's an egret out there. But we frequently saw ospreys diving into the streams and catching fish. That was always an inducement to go out and see if you could beat them at their game. This is high spring tide. This is 9 o'clock in the morning, April 15th, 1972. That's a boat there. This is is just sort of swinging now. I think I got this one just exactly as the tide was shifting. That's 4 o'clock in the afternoon on April 15th, 1972. I had never really understood anything about tides before. I knew that my mood would shift from one time or another during the day, but I didn't realize what it was for or where it was from. This is something I learned that just about everybody at St. Helena told me one time or another. They told me that babies were born when the tide turned. The only thing is that when we live when we live away from the sea, we're unaware of it. We don't see the tides. We just feel them. We don't know what it is that's doing things to it. The reason that I was there, although I did indeed spend a great deal of time, the local folks said that what you could do when things were bad, you could live out of the river. You could live out of the river, and things were bad, and I did live out of the river. But that wasn't really why I was there. This is a particular example of a guy that I got to know pretty well. He wasn't a great informant, but he became a good friend. He taught me how to fish. That's his house in the background, not a garden shack. And he lived there very happily. He's examined in front of him a field of tomatoes, planting garden tomatoes had become a pretty significant cultural activity by the time I got there. Historically, the main crop in this area was Sea Island cotton, which was back before the Civil War. And it was a very fine staple cotton with long threads, and it didn't really compete with other cotton, it competed with silk. It was a very, very valuable crop. It was an incredibly labor-intensive crop, and there were probably more slaves per unit of population in this area, in this island and 2 or 3 others, than anywhere else in the Confederacy in the United States. I tried to figure out just how many slaves there were, and it came to be something like about 95 or 96%. And of course, you can't really have 100% slaves. It doesn't quite work. You got to have but actually, the owners of these slaves often weren't there anyway, because it got hot and steamy here in the summer, and so they would go to Charleston to get away from the heat. I can't tell you that story. We'd be here until the day after tomorrow. But take it from me that the shortest version of the story is that during the Civil War, this area was early on in the war taken by Northern forces, and people from all over the South slipped in one way or another, and in 1864 there were land sales. The island had been put under control by Lincoln, by Stanton, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, and he was sent down there to sell off all the cotton that was in the barns because it was in the fall, and they had just brought in a magnificent crop of cotton. Of course, Union was broke, so he wanted the money. It's part of the reason that they lived here to try to take this area. So they auctioned off all the cotton. But Stanton was the one real radical in Lincoln's cabinet, and so he spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to have a land reform down there, and in fact he did. Very, very, very long, very complicated story, very, very shortly told, but we ended up with thousands and thousands of ex-slaves. They weren't ex-slaves yet, they were contraband is what they called them, because they were somebody else's property that you had gained after an act of war, which made them contraband. But they ended up being small landowners, and still are today. So unlike most of the rest of the South, where ex-slaves became tenant farmers. Here's the same guy. If you look closely at the bottom of his boat, you can see it's full of little fish. That's chowder right there, or soon will be. Right next to it, that kind of lumpy thing on the seat is a cast net. One of these big round nets that you kind of hold it just right, and you get a little swing, and you get a little swing, and you spin it out, and it's got weights around the edge, and it opens up and it drops into the sea. I did learn to use one, but not as well as this. That's a West African example of somebody using one of those cast nets. This guy taught me how to do that. One of my happiest days at St. Helena, I took my cast net out into the creek and filled a bucket half full of shrimp. Little tiny guys, but sweet and nice. I then took half of them across the street and gave them to my neighbor, who had done the same thing for me a number of times before. They laughed at how this white boy from up north was maybe good for something after all. One of the happiest days of my life. Here's another guy showing me his daughter's braids. She's a sweet little thing. One of my very best informants, Mr. Jerry Alston, was a wonderful old gentleman who spent an enormous amount of time with me, telling me about the history of the island and how people lived and how families worked. Another excellent informant, Elton Smalls, with my daughter, watching pigs. But why was I there? Another one of those long stories that I've got to tell short. In 1965, a very important man in New York, in the United States, published an important and influential book titled The Negro Family, The Case for National Action. Moynihan was a very important guy. He was a professor at Columbia. He was a senator from New York. His book was very controversial. It focused on what he called the matrifocal family and its pathology. I decided that, from an anthropologist's point of view who knew a lot about family, this just didn't seem right to me. So I decided to try to balance it out a little bit by finding a less urban, more rural black community and find out how their families were organized. Well, that wasn't necessarily the greatest idea. It was complicated because I was right. These families were about the most important thing in these people's lives. But it was about the only, what anthropologists like to think of as culture, the only culture that there was. There were no other organizations. There was no political life to speak of. Well, there were taxes, but that was about it. Many of the homes that I was in that island, I am quite confident that I was the only white person who had ever been in them. It was intensely segregated, although I would never have known. They were awfully nice to me. I had the advantage, I guess, of going down there with the white family. You see who else I had with me. And they all loved her. They all thought I was crazy for carrying her around outside without a hat. I never quite figured that out. And I didn't have one, so, I just irritated them that way. So family was the only social order that there was, and people were really very, very, very held onto their families very tightly, and talking about their families to a stranger was really tough. Within a couple of months, I finally did get people to talk to this weird dude about their family. But that wasn't supposed to happen. What I did discover, they didn't want to talk to me about families, but I found they were willing to talk to me about plants. It turned out that I would hear people say things like, them plants, they're good for medicine. Or the doctor, he out in the field. And I said, what was that all about? So I started talking to people, and oh yeah, we use these plants, these weeds, we use them to treat sicknesses. And I'd say, really? Oh yeah, it's really cool. And all of a sudden people started getting real, Julian, because I think the reason was, I think that the knowledge was sort of starting to pass. And most of the people who knew about, most of the people my age, or half a generation older, didn't know much about it, but their grandparents or their mothers or their aunts, or somebody in the family did. And I'd say, well, could you get me to talk to Aunt Louise? And so, sure, let's go. Come on, hop in the truck. And so we'd go over and see Aunt Louise, and we'd sit on the front porch for a couple hours. And I didn't say a word. I just sat there. I turned the tape recorder on, and I just sat there. And I let my neighbor, this guy or another one, interview his aunt. And after 2 hours, nothing bad had happened. And so then I would say, maybe I'd ask a question or two. Now I'm talking to this old lady who's the informant, who also has all that family information, which is what I'm really after. So after a couple of months, I would go back to see this lady 2 or 3 times and get some more plant information and chat with her about this and that. And then I'd finally broach the subject and I'd say, well, hey, look, could you tell me something about your family? And by then I was okay. She and I were both the descendants of Adam and Eve, so I was kin to one with them, which I thought was really sweet. So I ended up learning a lot about plants. I learned a lot about family too, ultimately, and I wrote my dissertation about them both. So what did I learn? A few were relatively easy to find and photograph, the plants that they were talking about. This one, the picture up there is what they call garlic. It's obviously some sort of an allium, I'm not really sure which one, maybe allium amplifibrasum, ordinarily called wild leek. It was used for arthritis rubs, fever, and something called high blood, which I'll tell you about in a little bit. Of course, I had no idea that there was such a thing as a voucher specimen, but I didn't have a photograph. Here's another one that they use a lot, mullein or Rhabascus absens. That was said to be good for arthritis and for low blood, sort of a stimulant when you feel tired or depressed. And this one is called big root. Elsewhere in the New World, it's called coral bean or carton spear. This is probably the most interesting medicinal plant that I learned about in St. Helena. It too is used for fevers and high blood. It's a fairly common plant, seen in fields and roadsides. I also saw it in a number of gardens. There's the plantsUSDA.gov distribution map of Erythrina herbacea. I am honestly, I don't really believe that part there. I really think that it really stays pretty close to the coast, except maybe in Florida. In Florida, it probably could go all the way across, but even that was a little dubious to me. I think this is the kind of a distribution that it really has. And this was right there at the southern end of South Carolina. It's a really interesting plant. And some years later, many aunts who were from the Smithsonian Institution published a book called Medicinal Plants of West Africa. The cover photo is Erythrina milbredi, a Seneca coral tree. This was used for fevers and arthritis, among other things. So the uses that they have in West Africa, some of the uses in West Africa are the same as they're very, very close to the uses for the same genus in the American South. And so this is the one thing that I came across that could possibly be an Africanism. I don't know what it is. Yeah, I guess you can see that. When I was editor of Economic Botany, the thing that I tried so hard to get at least minimized was the famous lists of hundreds and hundreds of medicinal plants. So here's my PhD dissertation. But I didn't know anything about it. I just was making this up as I was going along. Across the top here, we've got the conditions that people had: high blood, low blood, arthritis rub. No, that's, I can't read sideways. Anthelmintic. Yeah, there you go. Anthelmintic, arthritis rub, and a couple of other things. And then here are the names from what they call them in St. Helena, and these are the binomials. When I could figure them out, some of them I heard about it. They told me about some plants, and I never found examples of them. So they're just sort of, I know the common name, but I don't know anything else about them. And then I found whether they were listed in the US Pharmacopoeia and the National Formulary. That was sort of my indication that they had some medicinal value. Reading down, the plants that in their names are aloe, big root, cassina, garlic, horehound, life everlasting, nettle, peach tree leaf, pot bush, which is one which I never identified, snake root, Spanish moss, 666, which is a patent medicine that apparently in the past contained quinine, but it doesn't anymore. Today it's oh darn, I'm screwing this up here. Today it's just Tylenol in a bottle. Here's the second page of the list with some more plants. If anybody's interested, I'd be happy to get you a copy of that. But those lists aren't that much fun. It's working like thesis. So, in South Carolina, I learned a couple of things. I learned that people use plants to treat illnesses. It's sort of one of the fundamental ethnobotanical insights. That got me started. Remember, I was talking about plants because I wanted to get people to talk to me about their families. It was sort of a ruse. But, if you looked at that list of publications, you'll see that I got hooked. About high blood. This was the single most frequently treated condition in the data that I got, 15 different ones, 11 of them plants, plus a good old 666. This is tough here, guys. This doesn't work very well. Anyway, I'll bring it in. The treatment involved eating something that would bitter the blood. Because eating too much, it was caused because you had eaten too much fat, sweets, sugar, and that made the blood sweet, which meant one's pressure increased. Just why that all happened, I don't know, but that was what they told me, and I just write it down. The symptoms were fever, headache, muscle aches, etc. It was more common in men than in women, and more common in older people than in younger people. It had a sort of a counterpart of low blood, which was less common, but it was common enough. It was caused by the blood being too bitter, causing low blood and low pressure. At first I thought they were talking about blood pressure, but it really wasn't blood pressure. It was some other kind of a more generic sort of pressure. This was treated with sweet things like wine and salt, plus plants, beets, carrots, mullein, Asia berries, which is an exotic plant of which there was a lot in the island that people planted along the edges of the land, between the land and the marsh, because I guess for two reasons. It had a lot of root and could hold the land when there were storms. And the plant must also be sort of salt tolerant, because but there were lots and lots of them throughout the island, always in the same place, always along the edge of the marsh. And they produce a lot of these big fat berries, which would last over the winter and would ferment. And in the spring, the birds would get in there and they'd start eating those berries, and they'd end up flopping on the ground. They were totally drunk. It was really a riot. So, I learned that people treated illnesses with plants, and I learned that there was a significant variation possible in how people understood what illness really was. There was I never heard anybody talk about germs. Nobody ever talked about viruses, but they talked about pressure. So, my first efforts in ethnobotany, I took all that stuff and I wrote my PhD dissertation, and then I went on to do some more. And I asked myself the question, did anybody else ever use these plants? Or for the same purposes or for different purposes? And did they work? Of course, by now, I had realized that, quote, work, unquote, was a metaphor just like germs or pressure. And if they did, why? I got to really thinking about this. I said, why the dickens does something like opium, sap from a plant, stop pain? And I thought I was asking these really novel questions that nobody thought of before. But, you know, I hadn't thought of them before, and nobody told me about them before. I quickly realized that most of the plants my St. Helena friends had used were also used by Native Americans. So I waded into that literature. This is you know, mid-70s. This card is called an index card down there in the lower left. That's a trade name. And these things were pretty handy because within weeks I had more of those, you know, little sorts of ordinary index cards like you use in a file cabinet, in a card catalog. Anybody know what a card catalog is? Anyway, I just started gathering bibliography and harassing my librarians to get. I did more interlibrary loan in the year than all the rest of the faculty combined. They gave me a room. And then, what the thing with these cards was, you see there's a couple of places where there are little notches cut into the holes. You can code these things so that the thing down there, that's number 88 down there, the furthest one on the bottom. And that's clipped. Now, I don't remember what 88 stands for now. I could have told you that. But I had a key that probably 88 might have been something like, this is a codable source. And with that, I had thousands of these cards after a while. And I had a little silver, like a knitting needle, or more like a crochet needle. And you would take the cards and you sort of block them up. And you stick the thing through at hole number 88. And then you take them outside and you lift and you shake. And all the cards that had been punched at number 88 fell into the box or onto the floor or, you know, somewhere, they fell somewhere. And then you would put these in another box and you could go through and those are all of the sources that you had in this box that were codable sources. It was, you know, I mean, it was the crudest kind of a database management system that anybody has ever had, but, you know, it was all I had. I've got boxes and boxes of these things at home. By 1977, I had enough of this for a book. And by 1977, I had also discovered computers. I came back to my childhood love. And I ran into a couple of people who had really useful software for dealing with large databases. And I learned how to use that stuff and I put it all in there. This book in 1977 was really pretty unusual. There was really nothing quite like it, I don't think. What it looked like, this is what it looked like. This is pages 192 and 193. I picked them out because they've got some errors in it, just so that you can see that it wasn't all perfect. But what this shows is where are we here? We're with Thuja occidentalis. And then first, this is a bunch of Menominee, and then Ojibwa, and then Potawatomi uses of Thuja occidentalis. And it tells you what the use was, a dermatological aid with a little note, and then a source code and a page number. And this was all done on a line printer. I don't know if you guys know, anybody under 40 probably has never seen a line printer, lucky you. The line printer was a computer printer of the size of a small car. And it had these huge stack of fanfold paper under it that was perforated along the edge and folded so that pages would come up through it and then they would refold and you could go in and pick up a stack like that. And I learned that they changed the ribbon of the printer. I think it was Saturday night at midnight. So once I got everything ready to go, all the data, all the information was now not on those kind of cards that I had showed you, but IBM cards. And we had to transfer this stuff and hire key punch operators. I got a little grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Yay, humanities. And I got these ladies to do this key punching for me. And I went over there one day, Sunday at 1:30 in the morning, and put them all in and printed out 300 pages like this. If you look real closely, you may be able to see Down here at the bottom, it says 192, and that says 193, but in quite a different font. That was because those were done with a typewriter on sheets of paper with little sticky labels on them. And I then went and pasted it at the bottom of the page because in those days the computer wasn't clever enough to do page numbers. That book had 4,869 items, all and only medicinal. 1,288 species, 531 genera, 48 different cultures, and I'm guessing 2,867 taxonomic problems. That's just a guess. I don't know. I mean, the material that I used had been accumulated over a period of roughly 100 years, and you know how much stuff is the taxonomy in North American botanical terms have changed in the last week. Imagine how much they've changed in the last 100 years. So that was a major issue in coding all this stuff. One example of mine that I kind of like is Devil's Club. Just in compiling this first quite tiny version of this database, I had 3 different binomials which were quite fanciful, with a currently accepted name that I actually used. I don't know how I figured out that, which is today the plant list tells you that that's the correct term. I don't know if it really is. Oplopenax horridus. But by the time I got through with the 3rd version of this thing, 10 or 15 years later, I had 13 synonyms for Oplopenax horridus. 13. And that just happened to be in the curve. I had a lot that had 5, 6, 9. You had to choose. That was, for a non-botanist, believe me, sometimes common names are best. And it almost had the same common name. So this book helped with a number of issues. It was enormously helpful in dealing with was this plant used by other people? I mean, all of a sudden, I could pretty confidently say yes or no. For the same thing or different things, I could pretty confidently say yes or no. But it raised new issues too, because I had, all of a sudden, I don't remember the day, but I remember the feeling. It just sort of hit me, pow. You know, you've got, this thing is something different now. You've got that whole ethnoflora. I didn't have that term's only come along kind of recently. But that's what I had. I had what I just called it the medical flora. And I said, and I would read things in the medical literature about the history of medicine and how until the invention of penicillin, all of medicine had been the history of the placebo effect. And American Indians or people like that who went around and found medicinal plants, they just got lucky once in a while. And so I said to myself, at some point, you know, if they just got lucky once in a while, then what happens is that and if they just went out and tried everything, then the stuff that I have that's ethnoflora ought to be a random sample of the plants that are there. Okay, that's my null hypothesis. Medicinal plants of the American Indians are a a random sample of all the plants that are there. Well, it was not easy in those days to find a list of all the plants that were there. That was, you know, there still isn't a national flora, or, you know, we still don't have a national flora in the United States. Well, we do now. We have a couple of online ones, but there was no such thing as an online flora in those days. So finally, what I did end up with was I ended up with a checklist for the flora of North America, the preliminary checklist, which a couple of guys at the Missouri Botanical Garden gave me on a gigantic computer tape about like that, about the size of a bicycle tire. So that was what I used. And so I realized that if I could compare the ethnoflora to the total flora, I could see what was what. And a few years later, I had this is the first paper that I wrote doing a regression analysis of the existing plants against the medicinal flora. And of course, the assortment of medicinal plants was a wildly non-random variation on the plants that were there. And I used this kind of a regression analysis oh, you shouldn't use a regression analysis. You have to use Bayes statistics or something like that, which I don't understand. So if any of you remember Walter Lewis's Distinguished Economic Botany speech in 2006, he tried to sort out about 25 or 30 of those, of these kinds of analyses that he'd found in the literature, and it was a shambles, and I really felt sorry for him. It was a mess. I had a little more luck with my paper, 5 Floras, with co-authors Bob Pemberton, who worked on Korea, David Kiefer, who worked in Ecuador, and with Brent Berlin, who did all that wonderful work in Chiapas. We showed that the 4 ethnofloras from the whole Arctic zone, essentially north of the equator, my North American data, Brent's data from Chiapas, Pemberton's data from Korea, and some published data from Kashmir were astonishingly similar. While the sample from Ecuador, David's work, was dramatically different. We suggested that there was a different neotropical pattern than the whole Arctic pattern. We were wrong. Subsequently, I've done unpublished work, which I have not published, but which I've worked on privately, which shows that I have never found 2 neotropical, Amazonian or any places down there, samples that were remotely alike, let alone similar. The best example that I'm aware of, the easiest example, is Glenn Shepard's work with the Yora and the Yamashita, who live on opposite sides of a river in the Peruvian Amazon. These guys have been across the river from one another for 100 years. They're kind of enemies. They don't like one another at all. The one group, I don't remember which, came in about 100 years ago as a consequence of the expansion of the Europeans on the other side of the Andes. And the other folks have been there, who knows how long, forever. But after 100 years, you think they have these things sorted out, and they have exactly the same flora. But when we did the regression analysis on comparing them, their floras were more different than Chiapas and Kashmir, which is pretty wild. They're right, they can see, it's exactly the same flora. They take an entirely different sample, not entirely, a dramatically different sample of plants out of the thing. So anyway, that was fun. I have a drawer full of other floras, which I have kind of the information to be able to do this, but somehow I just can't quite get the energy to do it anymore. If I had a couple of graduate students, I suppose I could, but I don't. There was this whole other half of my work that Rick referred to, the pressure part, the high blood part, which I had been working on at the same time. And this paper, Anthropology of Symbolic Healing and Current Anthropology in 1979, was important for me, and it's been read by a lot of people, and it's made a lot of sense. Cut to the chase, the 2 sides come to fruition for me in 1998 with Native American Ethnobotany, which has 44,000 items, not 4,800, and my book on the placebo effect, which has my argument why that term should be abandoned and we should call it the meaning response, which came out in 2002. If you look carefully at the cover there, you might notice that the cover of Meaning Medicine and the Placebo Effect is a bunch of medicinal plants. There's Echinacea from Sanguinaria, and there's my totem plant, Geranium maculata. If you recall the DEB talk last year in North Carolina, Jan Salek talked about data, data, data. She sang it out to us. Well, there's Jan. Native American Ethnobotany, 44,691 items. 24,900 for drugs, 11,000 and change for foods, 2,500 fibers, 607 dyes, 5,494 others, firewood, building supplies, ceremonial legacies, and many more. So there's a lot of data there. represents uses of 4,029 different plant species. The most used species were Thuja plicata, Achillea millefolium, Prunus virginiana, Typha latifolia, and Acorus calum. Come on, Acorus. There you go. I mean, you know, one of the nice things is that before I did this, if someone asked me what were the most used plants in North America, I would have had a guess. I don't have to guess. I can tell you. I didn't put the numbers in. I could have. Native American Ethnobotany. Google Scholar says it's been cited 873 times, but you know, we know better than that. The online version at herb.umd.umich.edu has had 799,000 hits since May 14th, 2003. That I'm closing in on 800,000. That's more than 750,000 hits, and it isn't even about sex. And if someone wants to try, I'd love to know how many references there are to these two sources, to Native American Ethnobotany and the online version in Wikipedia. Wikipedia has been appropriating all of this information and turning it into little individual articles. It's really interesting. And if you just look up 80s Balsamia in Wikipedia, it'll have 3 paragraphs with 10 citations, 10 references. And they're not all for this, but almost every single one of them has a couple of references here. So the whole thing is sort of being moved over to another thing, which is, I think it's kind of cool. I don't mind a bit. This is what a little bit of what the database looks like. I put campus in there to mark. And you can see down there at the bottom your visitor numbers. I just got that this morning. This is only a tiny bit of the page. The page looks much nicer than this, but I couldn't figure out how to squish it all down into it. One slide. This thing here, this is a link, and back in my hotel room today, I clicked on it, and it opened up, but I don't think I can do that here. So I was hoping I could, but I don't think I could. I don't think it would work. So, in there, done that, I guess. Now to finish, I want to share something that was never able to publish. First, a very brief introduction to a fascinating topic from the meaning pressure side of my life. Something about the colors of medicines. The form of medicine matters. It makes a difference, at least in Western civilization, contemporary biomedicine. The form of medicine matters. I give you one, and here's an example. I compared 117 different double-blind trials, and I found that ulcers healed significantly more quickly in people taking 4 placebos a day than those taking only 2 placebos a day. So that means that sometimes the rate 4 times 0 is greater than 2 times 0. And surely 4 is better than 2, bigger than 2. I mean, I can remember my grandson, and he'd be over there and I'd say, Spencer, do you want 4 cookies or 2 cookies? I want 4 cookies. With no doubt about it. So, I mean, that makes perfectly good sense, except that it doesn't make any sense at all. The form of medicine matters. The route of administration matters. Sumatriptan or Imitrex, it's called other things in other places, I don't know what it's called in South Africa, is used to treat migraine. When it was first developed, the drug was available only in the form of an injection. Later, pill forms were developed. Large groups of patients with migraine were treated in randomized controlled trials with injected inert saline solution for their migraines. In later trials, large groups of patients were treated in RCTs with inert placebo tablets for migraines. The form of medicine matters. 25.7% were better with placebo pills, 32.4% were better with placebo injection. The difference is small, it's only 6.7%, but it's highly statistically significant. This could happen due to chance only twice in 1,000 experiments. Injections work better than, inert injections work better than inert pills. Sometimes 0 is greater than 0. The form that the medicine takes makes a difference. Makes it work differently, works it make it better or worse. My favorite example of form affecting medicine is color. Note that this, sort of an aside here, that this whole conversation sort of mimics the botanical herbalist notion of the doctor's signature, where what the thing looks like makes a difference. Color makes a difference. Changing the color of a pill can change the effect in a variety of ways. In one particular case, a dozen or more studies have shown that in Western nations, red pills tend to act as uppers or stimulants, while blue pills tend to act as uppers or stimulants, while blue ones tend to act as downers or sedatives. Moreover, although they probably don't realize that they're doing it, the drug manufacturers tend to follow suit, coloring their drugs to match these cultural expectations. Tom de Crane, a Dutch colleague of mine, and his colleagues did a study of 49 medicines available for sale in Holland that affect the nervous system. What they found was that medicines marketed as stimulants came in reds and purples, and ones that in fact came in as depressants downers of any type always came in blues. And when this is true, I've collected, it's probably, I've got a herbarium full of these studies of color. That's a joke. And then I ran across the case that didn't work. It turned out, I ran into this one study in Italy where it worked fine for women when you gave either blue placebos or blue sleeping pills to women. They worked better than when you gave them blue, red or green or any other color. I think yellow was the one that they had blue ones and they had yellow ones. And with the women, the blues put them to sleep much better than the yellow ones did. With the men, they couldn't go to sleep with a blue pill. They just got them all riled up. So I poked around, and I have a very dear friend, anthropologist, an Italian anthropologist who I've known for a long time. And then I told her about this, and we sat down and had a talk. And she told me that she thought that in Italy, there was a very special relationship between women and the Virgin Mary. And here's a nice, this notion of blue and women and the Virgin Mary is a very common notion. It goes way, way, way back. And it's particularly vivid in paintings. So this is a lovely painting by an unknown French artist, painted for King Richard II around 1395. And you see the Virgin there in the middle with the Christ child, surrounded by all these women who are angels, all dressed in blue. Okay? Here's another one from 100 years later. It's Botticelli. It's not quite as dramatic, but it's got the same Virgin, the child in blue, and there's blue up on the ceiling and the walls. The whole thing is suffused with that very nice blue. So, what about Italian men? Well, Forza Azzurri, Forza Azzurri is the Italian national football team. Blue for many Italian men is not a color of solace, but of excitement and stimulation, of joy and madness, of exhilaration, and if you know anything about the Italian national football team, often catastrophe. It's hardly the color of sleep. So I know that I have a certain sympathy with this, because a very good translation of Forza Azzurri chanted by Italian fans is "Go Blue." the chant of the University of Michigan Wolverines who wear maize and blue colors while running onto the field in Michigan Stadium with 110,000 screaming fans. This is not a soporific sight. I don't think blue pills would work for me. So, in Italy at least, blue can mean quite different things for men and women, and we can speculate at least that the meanings of these sleeping pills from their colors might explain the differential effectiveness in men and women. Right now we're going to move to a section of the presentation which is at least R, and maybe a little worse. So if you have a gentle soul, you might not cover your eyes. The meanings can be polysemic, multivalent, and complex. In English, blue, in addition to meaning down, low, depressed, having the blues, can also mean mildly salacious, sexy, inappropriate, as in a blue movie. Having the OED quotes a dictionary of slang, the Oxford English Dictionary, quotes a dictionary of slang from 1864 indicating blue, said of talk that is smutty or indecent. We are all, I suppose, familiar with Picasso's blue period, which lasted from about 1901 to 1904, when many of his paintings were suffused with a general blue color, like this one. Picasso was a young man, about 21, when he painted Erotic Scene. It belongs to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and I can't believe that it has ever hung on a public wall. This could be the largest single group that's ever seen this painting all at once in the history of time. But Picasso's interest in the erotic and his use of blue to frame it continued on for many years. This painting, when Picasso was about 51, is titled Nude, Green Leaves, and Bust, and shows his mistress, Marie Theresa Walther, with leaves and a statue. This painting was sold in May 2010 for $106 million, the most ever paid for a work of art at auction at the time. There's been a couple that have eclipsed that since, but that was the number one. So I love it. It's a great painting. It also shows the same blue as Erotic Scene. Art historians may squabble about what the blue in Picasso's blue period means. Now you know. I'm also very fond of this ad in Arabic. This is an ad for Viagra. The little tablet, as always, is pointing up and to the right. Below it, also in blue, is a little text. When I first ran across this ad, the sheet of paper was about that big, and the little Viagra tablet was life size. So that's why there's all this space around here. So anyway, the literal translation of the text from the Arabic is something like this: make a gubba out of a hubba. All right? A hubba is a little seed or a grain or a pit. A gubba is a dome, as on a mosque. So make a dome out of a pit, or a little more colloquially in English, make a mountain out of a molehill. The details vary, but the sensibility is obvious, and in Arabic it rhymes and it's blue. So the form of medicine matters. Number, mode of administration, size, capsules versus tablets, pills versus injections, and most amusingly for me, color matters. So the question that a question that has bedeviled me for many, many years was, well, does the color of medicinal plants matter? Well, not so easy to deal with. There's a book which might help, Nature's Palette, the Science of Plant Colors. Unfortunately, it's a really interesting book, but it doesn't help. And it doesn't even tell me why sometimes leaves are purple. Mostly green, but sometimes purple. I still don't understand. What color are the flowers? There are things that botanists, David Lee to the contrary, don't care about. One is color. They practically never tell you the color of flowers. Another is flavor. They rarely taste plants, and if they do, they don't write it down. And they don't pay much attention to color. Why? A lot of botanical work is done in herbarium. Herbarium sheets have flowers, which to my eye, after 20 or 200 years, are mostly brown. And they don't look very good to eat. Here, for example, is a herbarium sheet from the Field Museum of hibiscus collected in Chicago in 1891. I just saw some hibiscus around the corner over here, or maybe it was in my hotel. Didn't look like this. There's a hibiscus with the same herbarium sheet. So this is a possible reason why. I mean, I don't know. They write stuff on those sheets. You know, maybe there was a brilliant red, but you know, I've looked at herbarium sheets, so they don't usually tell you what color things are. Plants.usa.gov is one of my most valuable online resources. It has a really fine listing of I think that's mostly all of the plants in North America, north of the Rio Grande, and it's extremely useful. It does actually have in the database when you can download bits and pieces of it, the whole thing if you want. It does have a flower color field in its database. In 26,791 species listed, 1,767 have color information. That's 6.5%. Not very useful. So then there's John Cartez. John Cartez has this wonderful website at Bono. The website is wonderful. I don't think John's here. John's a little goofy. But he did collect color information. So I hornswoggled him out of it sometime a couple years ago. And he has color information for 18,529 North American species. Now, of course, many plants, gymnosperms and ferns and so on, don't have flowers, so they don't have flower color. So that's one reason why we don't have, this, 26,000 plants. But many and indeed, many flowers are multicolored or have a range of colors. So the 18,529 species that I have with colors have 31,702 colors. So then what I did was I decided but here are the colors. This by itself, when I sat there and I looked at it, I thought it was kind of interesting. I don't know if you should be able to read that. The most common flower color in North America is yellow. I really wouldn't guess that, but I still don't. I mean, at least according to John Cartez's database. Yellow, white, green, purple, pink, blue, red, maroon, orange, and black. 15 black. Those black ones are usually real dark purple. Here, I put this in a graph. This is the same order from left to right. It's yellow, white, green, purple, pink, blue, red, maroon, orange, and black. And that's a remarkably smooth curve, with the exception of blue. Red seems to me to be just a little bit high, and blue seems to be just a little bit low. And if there was just a little bit of something that really, somebody should try to explain that. That's too good to be true. Anyway, what I did was I cross-matched the color with a couple of disease categories. Here's this regression analysis, shows you eye medicines by flower color. And basically what it shows us is nothing. This is the predicted number of white flowers used for treating eye medicines if everything went randomly, and the white's up there a little bit, but that residual is only about 30. I mean, it's really trivial. This is purple. This is yellow over here. Yellow is a little below the line, but I can't make anything out of that. And purple is a little below the line, and the rest of them are just so practically close to the line that there's really nothing there. So the residuals are very, very small. Here's inflammation medicines by flower color. Purple has popped back up again. White is still sort of out there a little bit. But, you know, I can't see anything there. And I did another one. Dental medicines by flower color. This is the worst of all. The correlation between 95. It looks to me as if it's random. So then I did two more. I just did the correlation. It took about half an hour to do each one of those. And after three, I said, forget it. So I just did the correlations. I said if I saw something with a correlation that wasn't quite so high, I'd do the regression analysis. But, you know, so I did dermatological medicines, and then I did wound plus sore plus boil. So, nothing. Two conclusions and one more. There are no cases where a particular condition is treated with plants of a particular flower color. The best prediction of how many white flowers are used for anything is the number of white flowers. This is not publishable because no one will publish negative findings. It's also true that the original hypothesis is a stretch. While it does appear to be true that there are some broadly meaningful colors in Western civilizations which influence healing processes, I've already shown you that there are variations among Western countries and that color meanings are complex and pliable. So 100 Native American First Nations peoples are predictably going to have different opinions about the colors of medicines if they have any such opinions at all. More research, as we say, is needed. Okay. In the meantime, I've taken another ethnobotanical path, spending many happy hours in my wood shop making furniture, turning lumber on my lathe. This is a little oak side table that I red oak side table that I made in the North American craftsman style with, right down there, you can see the little ebony pegs, the Asperos species. The little table here on the left is a replica of a shaker table made in about 1820 in Mount Lebanon, New York. The exquisite original here is in the collection of the American Museum of Britain in Bath, Britain. The top of the original is made from a single 14-inch wide cherry board. Oh, man. Mine was made from an 8-inch board, and I had a heck of a time finding that board book-matched. It's now in my living room. I made a second one for my daughter in Philadelphia. I'm very pleased with that, too. That's a handsome table. For those of you who follow Shaker Furniture, this table is illustrated in Picasso's The Book of Shaker Furniture. That's a great book. I particularly enjoy wood turning on the lathe. Things like this little cherry purple heart accent. These little weed pots, they're about 3 or 4 inches tall. They're good for putting, rose hips in that. Those are rose hips there. This is walnut with some inlay, with a plate with some on it. That's a teething ring for my grandson. There's what we call a natural edge bowl. There's a little race car. I just made this about 2 weeks ago. This is a fruit bowl from a burl on an elm burl. We lost all our elm trees to not ash, I'm sorry, ash, green ash. We lost all our ash trees in the last couple of years to an Asian green ash borer. Shiny, pretty little bug. Killed millions and millions of trees. I have a friend who's an arborist, and she came down that tree the other day and brought me the burl. So I gave her the bowl. So this is the way I spend my time now. A few years ago, the SEB gavel and anvil. The gavel is walnut and apple. The anvil is mostly oak. Those 3 pieces were from my backyard. The center part of the ample is part of zebra wood, probably a Microberlinia brasiliensis from West Africa. Since this was the Society for Economic Botany, which is largely an American organization, but loves dealing with the rest of the world, I figured that was a nice balance of native and exotic woods. I did look at the thing the other day, and I noticed that the handle has faded. I'm going to have to work on my finishes. This was presented to the Society during the 2006 meeting in Thailand. So, it may have started as an accident, but it didn't end up that way. It ended up being a lifetime passion, and I thank you all from the bottom.